Radical inclusion challenges us to look more closely at those whom we invite to our tables and to ask how we relate to guests who are strangers, convicts, persons not properly dressed for our meals, or persons not sharing our values. Hospitality at its most daring will lead us to take risks, make us uncomfortable, and cause us to challenge a social order which keeps people poor. To quote Joan Chittister, hospitality is the way we turn a prejudiced world around, one heart at a time. Many of us work or volunteer in places of hospitality: hospitals, orphanages, hospices, women's shelters, shelters for refugees. One poignant example, the Gathering Place in St. John's, Newfoundland, is a community center for vulnerable persons who are homeless or living with inadequate supports. In this place, enlivened by Sisters of Mercy, Presentation Sisters, and more than 200 volunteers, a sculpture of hands created by the artist Gerald Squires reflects Jesus' words, "I was hungry, thirsty, naked, imprisoned, a stranger." When you look at the images, you cannot tell who is giving and who is receiving. The sculpture confirms that daring hospitality creates community marked by inclusion, equality, and respect. As we begin to know ourselves as members of a sacred community of all creation, we are coming to realize that we are not masters of earth, but guests of this life-sustaining place. The spiritual writer Beatrice Bruto says it this way: "I want to perceive Earth as a Eucharistic planet, a good gift planet, which is structured as mutual feeding, as intimate self-sharing." It is amazing that such a simple act like hospitality, our hospitality to the God who chooses to live among us, and our hospitality to the stranger, to the ones who are hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, and imprisoned, our hospitality could be so important in living God's image and likeness. Hospitality was an essential aspect of Israelite culture in the Old Testament, embedded in sacred codes of conduct which required that strangers be given food, water, and shelter. Abraham's first action after God's call into covenant was to offer hospitality to 3 strangers, not knowing that God had sent them. "Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree." Like Abraham, Jesus began his ministry with a meal, attending the wedding feast at Cana. He ended his ministry by serving his disciples bread and wine at the supper before his death. After his resurrection, he helped the disciples know him as transformed by sharing a meal with them. Key moments in Jesus' life, and moments in which he led the disciples to significantly shift their thinking, were marked by hospitality. The merciful and gracious God freely chose to come among us so that we would know how to be merciful. The early rabbis called God Shekinah, the divine presence among us. The angel told Joseph that the baby born of Mary would be Emmanuel, God with us. Our God, Shekinah, Emmanuel, is by choice a guest in our homes and in our hearts. God's presence among us makes the challenge of living in God's image more immediate. It also gives us greater assurance that we can do this despite our own vulnerability. The same sacred code is embedded in the New Testament. Elizabeth welcomed the newly pregnant Mary into her home. Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. Jesus invited the first disciples to his home, saying, "Come and see." Jesus shared meals with the most likely and the most unlikely people. His friends, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, Peter's mother-in-law, tax collectors, rich men, a prostitute, 5,000 men, women, and children, his apostles. In Matthew 25, when Jesus was asked how we could live in God's way, his words were starkly clear. "I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Let us renew our promises to welcome the stranger, to receive respectfully the welcome from earth to us, to be radically inclusive, and to become lovers of mercy and doers of justice in the image and likeness of our God of mercy and our God of justice.